Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting me spend some time with you today. I do appreciate it. Friendly reminder, do the like, share, subscribe thing. That's all I'm going to say about that anyway. Got a little bit of housekeeping to do, just to let you know. I have made the executive decision in my house, our house. I'm going to change my office to another room. So if you don't see a podcast or a video for next week, don't get upset. I'm still here. We're just rearranging some things. Where I'm at right now, there's really more room than I need. And we could actually use this room for other things. So we're going to do some swapping around. So if you don't see a podcast or a video, it's okay. We're just rearranging. I'll try, but I'm actually thinking about doing a series on something, and it actually comes out of Inheriting Lies. So if you haven't read Inheriting Lies, you might want to get a copy of that, read it, and be ahead of the group, so to speak, because it's going to be important. It's going to be important. Yes, I am wearing a sweater today because I've been out. We had about 10 inches of snow here where I live. Not exactly something they're used to down here. Living in the South, you don't get a lot of snow, so you don't get used to it. Not a big deal for me. I've dealt with feet of snow, not a problem. But yeah, it's chilly down here, and it's going to be fun for a couple of days. But it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Nashville area got hit way harder last week than we got hit this week. So it's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Something I want to touch on today, and it's not something that is generally considered a big deal, but I think it's getting to be a bigger deal. And that is, how often have we heard, oh, those people who lived long ago, they were much wiser than we are. They had all this figured out. And I'm not sure that's accurate. If you remember a few months ago, I did a video and a podcast called This Answer from Grok Surprised Me. And I'll try to remember to link to that. Here's the problem. If we think back many years ago, there were a lot of people writing about the Bible. There were a lot of people writing things, and they were guessing. I'm going to flat out say they were guessing. Some people thought they were inspired. Other people thought, oh, they really have a good idea. And they were guessing. And if you look in the video, I mentioned people like Spurgeon and some others. They did a lot of writing, but they didn't have all of the information they needed. Right now we are several generations into what I will call first language Hebrew speakers, people who were taught Hebrew as their first language. We have books. I've got books behind me here that are lexicons. They are Hebrew dictionaries. We have all of these things now that they didn't have access to when many of these people were writing. So what I'm wondering is, were they really wiser, or did they just read it in English and say, boy, this sounds good? Or did they read it in Greek using maybe the Greek manuscripts and possibly even the Septuagint that doesn't always agree with the original Greek manuscripts? Just saying. But were they really wiser, or did they look at it in a second language, in a translated language, and say, this has to be what this means? And I have done engagements before where I've talked about getting the former and latter-day rains confused. I've talked about other things. So really, were they wiser? Or were they doing the best they could with the information they had at the time? And if they were lacking information, what could they have done with the information we have today, with all of the books and the other writings that we have today? You know, you've heard me mention people like Umberto Cassuto. You know, they didn't have access to what he knew. They didn't have access to the things that he was able to figure out. They didn't have a lot of access to a lot of things, but first generation or first language is important because it gives you that understanding. And the people who don't have an understanding of the basic language, you know, and I'm not fluent in Hebrew by any stretch of the imagination. I have a working knowledge of it, and I rely on the experts. When I have questions, I ask them. And thankfully, I try not to make them tired of me because they're going to look at me and say, well, learn the language. I'm terrible with foreign languages, always have been. Don't know why I have such a blank space in my mind for them. I don't know. But with that information that we have today, we can look back and say, oh, this is what this means. That is what that means. This is the context it would have been understood in. When we see these things, and then we look at the people who were supposed to be much wiser than we are today, they may have been wiser, but they didn't have the information. Or if they were not as wise, if they didn't discern the information properly, or if they just, and I can think of a couple right off the top of my head, and I'm not going to name names here, but they hear a testimony of a young teenager, and they grab hold of that testimony and say, there's got to be proof of this. There's got to be proof of this. People who don't, and I don't know if I want to say this, but I want to say this. You know what I'm saying? People who don't know should not teach those who do. And the people who don't know should not teach anyone anyway. I had a really, really good teacher in school who used to say, you can't teach what you don't know. And as I got older, I had people who were in a supervisory position over me who would say, well, I don't have to know how to do what you do. I just have to know how to get you to do it better. Well, for me, that was a challenge. That was a challenge. And I think I carry that challenge over into examining Scripture. Because when I look at Scripture and I see these things, I say, did the people who came before us actually get it right? Can we depend on this? Where's our proof? Where's our witnesses? Where are the things that we know are absolutely factual? Now, there is one thing, and I was thinking about this yesterday while I was blowing some snow away. Do people who think they know, where do they get their information? Does it just come to them out of the blue? Did somebody tell them? Did they mishear what somebody told them? Did they misread what someone else had written? If you don't dig deep enough to verify, and it doesn't matter what it is, right? You have to verify the information you're given. It Doesn't matter if we're talking about the Bible. It doesn't matter if it's a police officer doing an investigation of a crime. If a police officer simply relies on a witness that says, yeah, I saw that person do this. Well, that's one witness. Okay, where were you standing? How were you looking? Do you wear glasses? Were you looking through a window? Were you looking through, all of these things matter. So how we know what we know? Okay, where did it come from and why do we think that way? Let's verify these things. Let's look at them and say, can these things be verified? And I think there's some very good old writers, back, even in going back as far as first century, who would look at the information differently had they had access to all of the information. A lot of times they were relying on either eyewitness accounts or something that an eyewitness had written down. Now, when we look at Scripture, what do we see? We see all of these things that are written down, and we forget that we need to put timing with them. We need to put context with them. We need to put all of these other things that go into it so that we're not dealing with fictional characters. We're dealing with real people living real lives in real time. It's that simple. It really is that simple. And when you're dealing with real people living in a real place, we have no eyewitnesses from 2,000 years ago. We have no eyewitnesses from 3,500 years ago. What we have is the writing. And that's why so many people get so excited, when an archaeologist digs up a tablet that says, oh, this really did happen in Jericho. Oh, this really did happen in Jerusalem. Oh, this really did happen. They get excited and say, see, that proves the Bible's true. We don't need to prove the Bible's true. We already know it is. In fact, something interesting I heard the other day. If there were no miracles in the Bible, nobody would question it. It would just be another history book, right? It would be the history of the Hebrew people. If there were no miracles, no one would question it. But because they exist, people think it's full of fairy tales. But here's where I want to go. The people who give us the information that we think we know, we need to verify it. We need to look at it deeply. We need to understand why they wrote what they wrote and what information they had when they wrote it. And that sets the premise for the series I want to talk about. And you'll understand why as I get into that. But again, it may be a week or so out because of what we're doing here. Also, don't be afraid because some of those episodes may be longer. I'm going to try my best to keep them under 20 minutes. Might not be able to do that. And hopefully I can get it done in 3 or 4. It would be really nice if I had everybody that listens in an auditorium where I could present it, answer questions for, half a day and do it that way. But I'm not set up for that. So, and I don't think anybody wants to travel right now. At least I don't. Anyway, all of that said, think about that. How do we know what we think we know? Where did it come from? Why did the people choose to write what they wrote? What information did they have access to? And were they really wiser than we are? Or did they just grab hold of something that sounded good to them at the time? Something to think about until next time. And until then, many, many blessings, everyone.